Wedding Day Disaster. Please subscribe, like, and share. Amaka's Wedding Day. The sun shone brightly on the beautiful gardens of the luxurious hotel, casting a warm glow over the elegant decorations and the sea of expectant guests. Amaka, resplendent in her stunning white wedding gown, beamed with happiness as she prepared to exchange vows with her beloved husband, Tund. As she took her father's arm, ready to walk down the aisle, Amaka's mother, Neoma, smiled warmly at her from the front row. But Amaka noticed something odd. Her mother's eyes seemed to flicker with a mixture of guilt and anxiety for a brief moment before she regained her composure. Amaka brushed it off as mere nerves, attributing it to her mother's natural worry about the success of the wedding. But little did she know, her mother's unease was rooted in a far more sinister secret. As the ceremony progressed, Amaka's joy and excitement only grew. She and Tund exchanged their vows, promising to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. But just as they were about to seal their union with a kiss, Amaka's eyes wandered to the back of the hall, where she spotted her mother slipping out of the room, followed closely by Tund's best man, Obina. A sudden, inexplicable sense of unease settled in the pit of Amaka's stomach. She tried to shake it off, telling herself she was just being paranoid. But as the reception got underway, Amaka found herself growing increasingly restless, her eyes constantly scanning the room for her mother and Obina. It wasn't until she stumbled upon a shocking scene in the hotel's restroom that Amaka's world came crashing down around her. There, in the dimly lit cubicle, she caught her mother and Tund in a compromising position, their faces twisted in a mixture of guilt and passion. Amaka's mind reeled as she struggled to process the horror of what she had just witnessed. Her mother, the woman she had always admired and respected, was having an affair with her husband. The same husband she had just exchanged vows with. As the truth sank in, Amaka felt her heart shatter into a million pieces. She stumbled backward, her vision blurring, as she desperately tried to escape the nightmare unfolding before her eyes. But it was too late. The damage was done. Amaka's wedding day, supposed to be the happiest day of her life, had turned into a disaster. And as she stood there, frozen in shock and betrayal, Amaka knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Amaka's eyes locked onto her mother's, her gaze burning with a mix of anger, hurt, and disappointment. Neoma's face crumpled, her eyes welling up with tears as she took a step forward, her hands outstretched in a plea for forgiveness. But Amaka was unforgiving. She turned on her heel, her wedding dress rustling as she stormed out of the restroom, leaving her mother and Tund behind. The reception hall was still buzzing with laughter and music, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. Amaka's eyes scanned the room, searching for a way to escape the chaos that was threatening to consume her. She spotted her best friend, Ife, and made a beeline for her. Ife's eyes widened in concern as Amaka approached, her face pale and shaken. "What's wrong?" Ife asked, her voice low and urgent. Amaka's lips trembled as she tried to form words. My mother and Tund," she stammered. Ife's eyes went wide with shock. "What about them?" Amaka's voice dropped to a whisper. "I caught them together. In the restroom." Ife's face fell, her eyes filling with tears. "Oh, Amaka, I'm so sorry." Amaka's composure broke, and she burst into tears, her body shaking with sobs. Ife wrapped her arms around her, holding her close as the two friends cried together, the noise of the reception fading into the background. As they stood there, Amaka's mind reeled with questions. How could her mother do this to her? How could Tund betray her trust like this? And what did it mean for their marriage, for their future together? The answers would have to wait. For now, Amaka just let the tears flow, mourning the loss of her innocence, her trust, and her happiness. As the tears slowly subsided, Amaka's anger and hurt began to simmer to the surface. She pulled back from Ife, her eyes blazing with determination. "I need to get out of here," Amaka said, her voice firm and resolute. "I need to get away from them." Ife nodded, understanding etched on her face. "I'll take you home. We can deal with this later." Amaka nodded, her mind racing with thoughts of what she would say to her mother, to Tund, and to the rest of the world. She knew that this was just the beginning of a long and painful journey. As they made their way through the crowded reception hall, Amaka's eyes met those of her mother, who was standing by the buffet table, a fake smile plastered on her face. Amaka's gaze narrowed, her anger and hurt boiling over. "You're dead to me," Amaka spat, her voice low and venomous. "You and Tund can have each other." Neoma's face crumpled, her eyes welling up with tears as Amaka turned and walked away, Ife by her side. The drive home was silent, Amaka's anger and hurt simmering just below the surface. Ife didn't try to talk to her, knowing that Amaka needed time to process her emotions. As they pulled up to Amaka's house, she turned to Ife, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Thank you," Amaka said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I would do without you." Ife smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "You'll never have to find out," she said, pulling Amaka into a tight hug. As they hugged, Amaka knew that she had a long and difficult road ahead of her. But with Ife by her side, she felt a sense of hope and determination that she hadn't felt in hours. She would get through this, Amaka vowed to herself. She would survive this betrayal, and she would come out stronger on the other side. As the days passed, Amaka struggled to come to terms with the betrayal. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and couldn't concentrate on anything. Her mind was consumed by thoughts of her mother and Tund, and the pain they had inflicted on her. Ife was a constant presence, staying with Amaka at her house, cooking for her, and listening to her vent about her feelings. Amaka's other friends and family members tried to reach out to her, but she pushed them away, feeling like she was drowning in her own emotions. One day, as Amaka was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, Ife sat down beside her and took her hand. "Amaka, you need to talk to someone about this," Ife said gently. "You can't keep bottling it up inside. It's not healthy." Amaka shook her head, feeling a lump form in her throat. "I don't know who to talk to," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mother, she's the one who's supposed to be there for me. But she's the one who hurt me the most." Ife squeezed her hand. "I'm here for you, Amaka. And I'll support you no matter what. But maybe it would be helpful to talk to a professional, someone who can help you process your emotions and work through this." Amaka thought about it for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "I'll do it." Ife smiled and hugged her. "That's my strong girl," she said. With Ife's support, Amaka started seeing a therapist, who helped her work through her emotions and come to terms with the betrayal. It wasn't easy, and there were many times when Amaka felt like giving up. But with time, patience, and support, she slowly began to heal. As she looked back on the experience, Amaka realized that the betrayal had been a wake-up call, forcing her to reevaluate her relationships and her own sense of self-worth. It had been a painful and difficult journey, but in the end, it had made her stronger, wiser, and more resilient. As Amaka continued to heal and grow, she began to see the world in a new light. She realized that she had been living in a bubble, surrounded by people who didn't truly care about her. Her mother's betrayal had been a harsh wake-up call, but it had also given her the courage to start fresh. Amaka started to reconnect with old friends and make new ones. She joined a book club and started taking art classes. She even started dating again, cautiously at first, but eventually opening herself up to the possibility of love. Through it all, Ife remained her rock, her confidant, and her partner in crime. Together, they laughed, cried, and explored the world. One day, as they were sipping coffee at a quaint cafe, Ife turned to Amaka with a mischievous grin. "I have a surprise for you," Ife said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Amaka raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Ife leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been talking to a lawyer, and we can sue your mother for emotional distress." Amaka's eyes widened in shock. She had never thought about taking legal action against her mother. "I don't know, Ife," Amaka said, hesitating. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that." Ife nodded understandingly. "I get it. But just think about it, okay? You deserve justice, Amaka. You deserve to be heard." Amaka nodded, her mind racing with thoughts of what could be. She knew that taking legal action against her mother would be a difficult and painful process, but she also knew that it might be the only way to get closure. As she left the cafe with Ife, Amaka felt a sense of determination wash over her. She was ready to take control of her life, to stand up for herself, and to fight for justice. The journey ahead would be long and arduous, but Amaka was ready. Amaka spent the next few days thinking about Ife's suggestion, weighing the pros and cons of taking legal action against her mother. She knew it wouldn't be an easy decision, but she also knew she had to do something. Finally, after much contemplation, Amaka made up her mind. She would sue her mother for emotional distress. It was time to take control of her life and hold her mother accountable for her actions. With newfound determination, Amaka marched into Ife's office, a small smile on her face. "I've decided to do it," Amaka said, her voice firm. "I'm going to sue my mother." Ife's face lit up with a bright smile. "That's my girl," she exclaimed, pumping her fist in the air. "I'm so proud of you, Amaka. You deserve justice." Together, Amaka and Ife began the process of building a case against Neoma. They gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses, and consulted with lawyers. As the days turned into weeks, Amaka felt a sense of empowerment wash over her. She was taking control of her life, standing up for herself, and fighting for what was rightfully hers. But little did Amaka know, her mother had a few tricks up her sleeve. Neoma was not going to go down without a fight, and she was willing to do whatever it took to protect herself. The battle between Amaka and her mother was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. As the court date approached, Amaka's anxiety grew. She had never been in a courtroom before, and the thought of facing her mother in such a formal setting made her stomach twist with nerves. Ife, sensing Amaka's unease, sat down with her to go over the case one last time. "Remember, Amaka, you're not just fighting for yourself," Ife said, her voice calm and reassuring. "You're fighting for every person who's been hurt by Neoma's actions. You're fighting for justice." Amaka took a deep breath, letting Ife's words sink in. She was right. This wasn't just about Amaka's personal pain, it was about holding her mother accountable for her actions. The day of the court hearing arrived, and Amaka stood outside the courtroom. Her heart racing with anticipation. Ife gave her a reassuring smile and a squeeze on the arm. "You got this, Amaka," Ife whispered. Amaka nodded, took a deep breath, and stepped into the courtroom. Neoma was already seated, her lawyer by her side. Amaka's eyes locked onto her mother's, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. The judge entered, and the hearing began. Amaka's lawyer presented their case, outlining the emotional distress Neoma's actions had caused Amaka. Neoma's lawyer countered, claiming that Amaka was being dramatic and that her mother had done nothing wrong. Amaka listened, her anger growing with each passing minute. How could her mother's lawyer deny the pain Neoma had caused? Finally, it was Amaka's turn to speak. She stood up, her voice shaking at first, but growing stronger with each word. "I was betrayed by the one person who was supposed to love and protect me," Amaka said, her eyes locked onto her mother's. "My mother's actions have caused me irreparable harm, and I demand justice." The courtroom fell silent, the only sound the soft rustling of papers. Amaka's eyes never left her mother's face, and for a moment, it seemed like time stood still. Then, the judge spoke, his voice firm and authoritative. "We will review the evidence and make a decision." Court adjourned. Amaka felt a rush of emotions as she left the courtroom. She had faced her mother, and she had spoken her truth. Now, all she could do was wait and see what the outcome would be. As Amaka waited for the judge's decision, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She had poured her heart and soul into the case, and the thought of losing was unbearable. Ife, sensing Amaka's anxiety, put a reassuring arm around her shoulders. "We've done everything we can, Amaka," Ife said. "Now it's up to the judge. We just have to wait and see." Amaka nodded, taking a deep breath as she tried to calm her nerves. Days turned into weeks, and Amaka heard nothing from the court. She was starting to lose hope, wondering if she had made a mistake by pursuing the case. But then, on a sunny afternoon, Amaka received a call from Ife. "Amaka, it's done," Ife said, her voice trembling with excitement. "The judge has made his decision. We won." Amaka's heart soared as she let out a whoop of joy. She had done it. She had stood up to her mother and fought for justice. As she hung up the phone, Amaka felt a sense of pride and accomplishment wash over her. She had faced her fears and come out on top. But as she turned to share the news with her friends and family, Amaka's eyes landed on a figure standing in the doorway. It was her mother, Neoma. Amaka's heart sank as she realized that her mother had come to confront her. But Amaka was not afraid. She stood tall, her head held high, as she faced the woman who had betrayed her. "What do you want, mother?" Amaka asked, her voice firm and cold. Neoma took a step forward, her eyes pleading. "Amaka, please forgive me," she said. "I was wrong to hurt you, and I promise to make it right." Amaka raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "How can you make it right, mother?" she asked. "You've broken my trust, and you've hurt me in ways that can never be undone." Neoma took another step forward, her hands outstretched. "I know I can never undo the pain I've caused," she said. "But I want to try to make amends. I want to be a part of your life again, Amaka." Amaka looked at her mother, searching for any sign of sincerity. But all she saw was a woman who was desperate to save her own skin. "I'm sorry, mother," Amaka said, her voice firm. "But it's too late for apologies. You've had your chance to make things right, and you blew it. Now, it's time for me to move on with my life." As Amaka turned to walk away, Neoma's face crumpled, and she burst into tears. But Amaka didn't look back. She knew that she had made the right decision, and she was ready to start a new chapter in her life. As Amaka walked away from her mother, she felt a sense of liberation wash over her. She had finally stood up for herself and set boundaries with the person who had hurt her the most. Ife, who had been watching the scene unfold, rushed over to Amaka's side and wrapped her in a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you, Amaka," Ife said, tears streaming down her face. "You deserve so much better than a mother like Neoma." Amaka smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude towards her friend. "Thanks, Ife," she said. "I couldn't have done it without you." As they hugged, Amaka felt a sense of closure wash over her. She knew that she would never be able to go back to the way things were before, but she was ready to move forward and start a new chapter in her life. Over the next few weeks, Amaka focused on rebuilding her life. She started taking classes at a local art studio, rekindled old friendships, and even started dating again. But despite the progress she was making, Amaka couldn't shake the feeling that her mother's betrayal had left a deep scar. She struggled with trust issues, often finding it hard to open up to new people. One day, as she was painting in her studio, Amaka received a surprise visit from her father. He had been absent for most of her life, but Amaka had always held on to the hope that he would one day return. "Amaka, I'm so sorry," her father said, his eyes filled with tears. "I had no idea what was going on with your mother. I'm ashamed to say that I was just as blind as you were." Amaka looked at her father, searching for any sign of insincerity. But all she saw was a deep regret and a desire to make things right. "It's not your fault, Daddy," Amaka said, her voice softening. "You didn't know. But I'm glad you're here now." As they hugged, Amaka felt a sense of healing wash over her. She knew that she still had a long way to go, but with her father by her side, she felt like she could finally start to rebuild her life. But just as things were starting to look up, Amaka received a shocking phone call. It was from a lawyer's office, and they had some surprising news about her mother's past. Amaka's heart skipped a beat as listened to the lawyer's words. "What do you mean my mother's past?" she asked, her mind racing with possibilities. The lawyer hesitated before speaking. "It appears that your mother, Neoma, has a history of manipulation and deception. She has been involved in several scams and has a trail of victims in her wake." Amaka's eyes widened in shock. She had known that her mother was capable of hurting those around her, but she had no idea that it was this deep-seated. What kind of scams? Amaka asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The lawyer sighed. It's a long list, but it includes embezzlement, identity theft, and even blackmail. She's been using her charm and beauty to manipulate people into doing her bidding. Amaka felt like she had been punched in the gut. She couldn't believe that her own mother was capable of such things. Why are you telling me this? Amaka asked, her mind reeling with questions. The lawyer's voice was sympathetic. Because, Amaka, you have a right to know the truth about your mother. And because we believe that you may be in danger. Your mother's actions have consequences, and we don't want you to get hurt. Amaka's eyes narrowed. She was determined to get to the bottom of this. What do you want me to do? She asked. The lawyer's voice was firm. We want you to stay away from your mother. And we want you to cooperate with us as we build a case against her. Amaka nodded, her mind made up. She was ready to take a stand against her mother and bring her to justice. But as she hung up the phone, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was in for the fight of her life. Amaka's hands were shaking as she hung up the phone. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Her mother, the woman who was supposed to love and protect her, was a con artist? She felt a wave of emotions wash over her, anger, sadness, and betrayal. How could her mother do this to her? To their family? Amaka took a deep breath and tried to calm down. She knew she had to think clearly and make a plan. She couldn't just sit back and do nothing. She decided to start by gathering evidence. She began to dig through old family records and documents, looking for any clues that might support the lawyer's claims. As she searched, Amaka stumbled upon a shocking discovery. A bank statement from several years ago showed a large transfer of money from her mother's account to an offshore account. Amaka's eyes widened as she realized the implications. Her mother had been laundering money, and Amaka had unknowingly been a part of it. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her. How could her mother do this to her? To their family? Amaka knew she had to take action. She couldn't just sit back and let her mother continue to deceive and manipulate people. She decided to go to the authorities and report her mother's activities. It was a difficult decision, but Amaka knew it was the right thing to do. As she walked into the police station, Amaka felt a sense of trepidation. She knew that reporting her mother would have serious consequences, but she also knew that it was necessary. She took a deep breath and approached the officer at the desk. I need to report a crime, she said, her voice firm. The officer looked up at her, a curious expression on his face. What kind of crime? He asked. Amaka hesitated for a moment before speaking. My mother is a con artist, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She's been laundering money and deceiving people for years. The officer's expression changed from curiosity to shock. I see, he said, his voice serious. We'll need to take a statement from you. Can you come with me? Amaka nodded and followed the officer to a small room in the back of the station. She took a deep breath and began to recount her story, starting from the moment she discovered her mother's infidelity to the revelation about her mother's shady business dealings. The officer listened attentively, taking notes and asking occasional questions to clarify certain points. Amaka felt a sense of relief wash over her as she shared her story, finally unburdening herself of the secrets and lies that had been weighing her down. When she finished, the officer nodded sympathetically. Thank you for coming forward, Amaka, he said. We'll do everything we can to bring your mother to justice. Amaka felt a sense of hope rise up in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, she could finally get the closure she deserved. The officer handed her a folder containing a copy of her statement and some additional information about the investigation. We'll be in touch soon, he said. In the meantime, please be careful. Your mother may try to contact you or intimidate you into silence. Amaka nodded, feeling a shiver run down her spine. She knew that her mother was capable of just about anything. As she left the police station, Amaka felt a sense of trepidation. She knew that she had just set in motion a chain of events that would change her life forever. But she also felt a sense of determination. She was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that she had finally taken control of her life and was fighting for justice. As she walked away from the station, Amaka's phone buzzed in her pocket. She hesitated for a moment before answering, wondering if it might be her mother trying to contact her. But to her surprise, it was a text from an unknown number. "You're brave to come forward," the message read. "But be careful. Your mother has friends in high places." Amaka's heart skipped a beat as she read the message. Who was this mysterious person, and what did they know about her mother's dealings? Amaka's mind was racing with questions as she stared at the mysterious text message. Who was this person, and how did they know about her mother's dealings? Were they a friend or a foe? She decided to respond to the message, hoping to get some answers. "Who is this?" she typed. "How do you know about my mother?" The response came quickly. "I'm someone who knows the truth about your mother's business dealings," the message read. "And I'm willing to help you bring her to justice." Amaka's heart skipped a beat as she read the message. Could this person be a valuable ally in her quest for justice? She decided to take a chance and ask for more information. "What do you know about my mother's business dealings?" she typed. The response came quickly. "I know that she's been involved in some shady dealings," the message read. "I know that she's been using her charm and beauty to manipulate people into doing her bidding. And I know that she's been laundering money through a series of shell companies." Amaka's eyes widened as she read the message. This person seemed to know a lot about her mother's dealings. She decided to ask one more question. "What's your motive for helping me?" she typed. The response came quickly. "I'm someone who's been hurt by your mother's actions," the message read. "And I want to see her brought to justice." Amaka's heart went out to this mysterious person. She knew how it felt to be hurt by her mother's actions. She decided to take a chance and trust this person. "Okay, I'm willing to work with you," she typed. "But I need to know more about you. Can we meet in person?" The response came quickly. "I'd like that," the message read. "But we need to be careful. Your mother has eyes and ears everywhere. Let's meet in a public place, somewhere safe." Amaka nodded to herself as she read the message. She knew that she had to be careful. She decided to suggest a meeting place. "How about the coffee shop on Main Street?" she typed. The response came quickly. "That sounds perfect," the message read. "I'll meet you there tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone." Amaka's heart skipped a beat as she read the message. She was both excited and nervous about meeting this mysterious person. But she knew that she had to take a chance. She had to see this through, no matter what. Amaka arrived at the coffee shop early, her nerves buzzing with anticipation. She had no idea what to expect from this mysterious person, but she was determined to see it through. As she waited, sipping on a cup of coffee, she couldn't help but wonder what this person's story was. How had they been hurt by her mother's actions? And what did they hope to achieve by helping Amaka? Just as she was starting to get restless, a figure walked into the coffee shop. It was a woman, dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit, with a kind face and piercing green eyes. The woman scanned the room, her eyes locking onto Amaka's. She smiled, and Amaka felt a sense of calm wash over. In Amaka's determination, she reached into her bag and pulled out a slim folder. Sliding it across the table, she said, "This is a starting point. Inside, you'll find records of financial mismanagement, fraudulent contracts, and even letters from people who were manipulated or coerced by her. It's not everything, but it's enough to start connecting the dots." Amaka hesitated before picking up the folder, her fingers trembling slightly. "How did you get all of this?" she asked. "I worked with someone close to your mother, a whistleblower," Ada said. "They wanted to remain anonymous, but they've been collecting evidence for years. It took me a long time to gain their trust. And now, they're ready to help expose her." Amaka opened the folder and skimmed through its contents. Her heart sank as she read the first document, a forged business contract that bore her mother's signature. This wasn't just petty manipulation, it was deliberate, systemic corruption. As she flipped through the pages, she felt a mixture of anger and shame. How had she been so blind to this side of her mother? And how many lives had been destroyed because of it? I had no idea it was this bad, Amaka whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ada reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on Amaka's. You couldn't have known. But now that you do, you have the power to make a difference. Together, we can bring her to justice and make sure she can't hurt anyone else. Amaka looked up at Ada, her eyes brimming with determination. What's the next step? Ada leaned in, her voice low and steady. We need to build a coalition. People who've been affected, people who are willing to speak out. Once we have enough testimonies, we can go public or even take this to the authorities. But we have to be careful, your mother is resourceful and powerful. She won't go down without a fight. Amaka nodded, her mind already racing with ideas. She wasn't just doing this for Ada or the others her mother had hurt. She was doing it for herself, to break free from the shadow of her mother's sins and build something honest. Let's do it, Amaka said firmly. I'm all in. Ada smiled, a hint of relief breaking through her stoicism. Good. We'll need each other for this. Let's meet again tomorrow, same time. I'll bring more evidence, and we'll start mapping out our plan. As Ada stood to leave, Amaka felt a flicker of hope stir within her. This wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the right path. She watched as Ada walked out of the coffee shop, her heart a mix of trepidation and determination. Amaka knew she had just taken the first step in a journey that would change everything. The following day, Amaka arrived at the coffee shop early again, her mind already churning with questions and strategies. She brought a notebook this time, determined to document everything and approach this with the precision it required. As she stirred her coffee absently, Ada walked in, her usual calm demeanor tempered with a sense of urgency. She carried a larger folder this time, along with a tablet tucked under her arm. Good morning, Ada greeted, sliding into the chair across from Amaka. Her green eyes were sharp, scanning the room briefly, before focusing on her companion. Morning, Amaka replied, sitting straighter. I've been thinking all night. What exactly does building a coalition look like? How do we find these people without tipping off my mother? Ada smiled faintly, as though she was proud of Amaka's proactive approach. That's exactly the right question. I've been working on that. She placed the folder on the table and opened it, revealing a series of photographs, notes, and timelines. These are individuals who've already come forward privately. Most of them are willing to help, but they're terrified of your mother's reach. Amaka scanned the faces in the photographs, businessmen, community leaders, even a few everyday people who bore expressions of fear and exhaustion. It was a sobering reminder of just how widespread her mother's influence was. We'll need to reassure them that they'll be protected, Ada continued. That's where anonymity comes in. We can use encrypted communication tools and work with legal professionals who specialize in whistleblower cases. But even with precautions, it's a risk for everyone involved. Amaka nodded slowly. What about the people who are too scared to speak? Or those who might still be loyal to her? Ada's expression darkened. There will always be those who won't budge. Some out of fear, others because they benefit from her schemes. We'll focus on the ones who want justice. The rest, we'll deal with as the situation unfolds. Amaka hesitated. Have you spoken to my father about any of this? The question felt heavier than she intended, and she immediately regretted asking it. Ada's gaze softened. Not yet. From what I've learned, he's been kept in the dark about most of your mother's dealings. It's possible he could be an ally, but we need to tread carefully. If your mother finds out he's involved, she won't hesitate to retaliate. Amaka's stomach twisted. She had always seen her father as a strong but distant figure, someone who provided but never interfered in her mother's sphere. If he really didn't know, how would he react when he found out? Ada broke the silence. For now, let's focus on gathering more testimonies. I've arranged a meeting with someone who used to work closely with your mother. They're willing to talk, but only in person. Amaka raised an eyebrow. Why in person? Isn't that risky? They're old school, Ada explained with a faint smile. And they don't trust technology. But they have critical information, details about offshore accounts, and secret deals that could be the key to taking her down. When's the meeting? Amaka asked, her pulse quickening. Tonight, Ada replied. I'll pick you. At 8. The location's been chosen carefully to avoid suspicion. Amaka nodded, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. This was escalating faster than she'd expected, but she was ready. Her mother's empire of lies was beginning to crack, and Amaka intended to be there when it crumbled. As Ada stood to leave, she placed a reassuring hand on Amaka's shoulder. You're doing the right thing, Amaka. It won't be easy, but I promise it'll be worth it. Amaka met her gaze, determination burning in her chest. I'm not backing down. Not now. Not ever. That evening, as the clock struck 8, Amaka stood by her apartment window, watching the street below. When Ada's car pulled up, she took a deep breath, grabbed her coat, and stepped outside. This was more than just a meeting, it was the next step in dismantling her mother's empire. And for the first time, Amaka felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. The drive to the meeting location was quiet, but the air in the car buzzed with unspoken anticipation. Amaka glanced at Ada, who kept her eyes firmly on the road, her expression a mix of focus and tension. Who is this person? Amaka finally asked, breaking the silence. Ada hesitated for a moment before responding. His name is Charles. He used to be your mother's financial advisor. He was deeply involved in managing her offshore accounts, but when he started questioning her practices, she cut him off, and made sure he couldn't work in the industry again. Amaka's stomach churned. So he's one of her victims too. Ada nodded. In a way, yes. But he also knows more about her financial operations than anyone else. If he's willing to talk, we'll finally have the smoking gun we need. They pulled up to an unassuming building on the outskirts of town. It was a small cafe, dimly lit and quiet, with only a handful of patrons. Ada led the way inside, scanning the room before nodding toward a corner table where a man sat nursing a cup of tea. Charles was in his late 40s, his once sharp features softened by weariness. His suit was well tailored but bore the signs of wear, and his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. He looked up as they approached, his gaze flicking between Ada and Amaka. Charles, Ada greeted, her tone calm but firm. Thank you for meeting with us. He nodded, gesturing for them to sit. I didn't think I'd ever see the day when someone would take on your mother, he said, his voice tinged with bitterness. But I suppose it was only a matter of time. Amaka sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I need to understand, she said, her voice steady, despite the storm brewing inside her. How did she do it? How did she build this empire of lies? Charles sighed, leaning back in his chair. Your mother is a master manipulator, Amaka. She knows how to find people's weaknesses and exploit them. She built her fortune on a combination of charm, intimidation, and outright fraud. The offshore accounts? There. The tip of the iceberg. He pulled a small USB drive from his pocket and placed it on the table. On this drive are detailed records of her financial transactions, accounts in the Caymans, shell companies in the British Virgin Islands, and money laundering schemes that would make your head spin. I kept these as an insurance policy, but I'd been too scared to use them. Amaka stared at the USB drive, her heart pounding. This was it, the evidence they needed to expose her mother. Why now? Ada asked, her tone cautious. Why are you willing to come forward after all this time? Charles hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table. Because I've lost everything, he said quietly. My career, my reputation, my family. I have nothing left to lose. If helping you brings her down, then at least it'll mean something. Amaka's chest tightened. She could see the pain in his eyes, the years of suffering etched into his face. We'll protect you, Ada said firmly. We're building a coalition of people who've been hurt by her. You won't be alone in this. Charles looked at her, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Just promise me one thing, he said, turning to Amaka. Promise me you'll see this through. No matter how hard it gets. Amaka met his gaze, her own eyes fierce with determination. I promise, she said. I won't stop until she's brought to justice. Charles nodded, sliding the USB drive across the table to her. Then you have everything you need. But be careful, your mother is dangerous. If she finds out what you're doing. We know the risks, Ada interrupted. But thank you. This is a big step forward. As they left the cafe, Amaka clutched the USB drive tightly in her hand. The weight of what it represented was almost overwhelming, but she refused to let fear consume her. Back in the car, Ada glanced at her. Are you okay? Amaka nodded, her jaw set. I'm ready. Let's go through this tonight and start mapping out our next move. Ada smiled faintly, a glimmer of pride in her eyes. You're stronger than you think, Amaka. We'll get through this together. As they drove off into the night, Amaka felt a surge of determination. Her mother's reign of terror was coming to an end, and she was going to make sure of it. Later that night, Amaka and Ada sat in Ada's small, meticulously organized office. The USB drive sat on the desk between them, a seemingly innocuous object that held the potential to unravel a lifetime of deceit. Ada inserted the drive into her laptop, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the screen. This is it, she said, scrolling through the files. Transactions, names, dates, Charles wasn't lying. This is everything. Amaka leaned over, her heart pounding as she scanned the documents. Offshore accounts, fraudulent contracts, and payments to individuals whose names she didn't recognize. It was overwhelming, but also empowering. This is enough to take her down, Amaka said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and dread. Ada nodded, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she organized the files. It's a solid start. But we'll need to cross-reference this with other testimonies and build a narrative that's airtight. The last thing we want is for her to find a loophole. As they worked, the room was silent except for the hum of the laptop. Hours passed, and the pile of evidence grew more damning with every file they opened. Then, Ada froze. Her hand hovered over the mouse, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the screen. What is it? Amaka asked, her voice tinged with unease. Ada didn't respond immediately. She clicked on a folder labeled Confidential, Personal. Inside was a series of files, each marked with a familiar name, Amaka. Amaka's blood ran cold. Why would my name be there? Ada opened one of the files, and the screen filled with detailed information, emails, financial records, even photos. Amaka's entire life was laid out before her, as if someone had been watching her every move. This doesn't make sense, Ada said, her voice low and filled with tension. Why would she be keeping such detailed records on you? Amaka stared at the screen, her mind racing. And then, it hit her, a terrible realization that made her stomach drop. She knows, Amaka whispered, her voice trembling. She knows what we're doing. Before Ada could respond, her phone buzzed on the desk. She picked it up, her face paling as she read the message. It was a single sentence, "Stop now, or you'll regret it." The room fell into a suffocating silence. Amaka felt her chest tighten as she looked at Ada, whose composed facade was beginning to crack. What do we do? Amaka asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ada locked eyes with her, her expression hardening. We keep going. But we have to move fast. She's already one step ahead. At that moment, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. The faint hum of the laptop died, leaving only the sound of their shallow breaths in the eerie silence. And then, from somewhere outside, came the unmistakable sound of a car engine idling, too close for comfort. Amaka, Ada said, her voice urgent but calm. We're not safe here. Amaka's heart pounded as she stood, adrenaline surging through her veins. She grabbed the USB drive, clutching it tightly. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway outside. Run, Ada whispered, her eyes wide. And with that, they bolted for the door, leaving the evidence and their fragile sense of security behind as the shadow of her mother's power loomed closer than ever.